our second round with 4-color aggro. Uh, this round we faced against a matchup on the other side of the spectrum. So this is basically just a mulligan. I would only keep this hand if the last card in it was Aether Marvel Works and the rest of my deck has Ulamogs and Emrakul's, which I probably did at some point during the Pro Tour actually. But this hand's fine. Uh, Curves out to a Tamio. We're going to ship that. It doesn't really matter though because of the attune. I really just need, when you have like a turn 1 shuffle effect, you just need like a default to prevent any kind of info leak, even if it's like super small, or really just mental effort until you realize that. Just don't waste it. So our opponent plays a Fumarole, which is pretty indicative of a control deck. We play Servant. Servant dies. And we're going to see our first, like, somewhat interesting play of the game, which is not extending our Tireless Tracker into removal. We just extend a crappy Reflector Mage, which doesn't die. And again, same thing. Extend a Reflector Mage, and then our opponent boards in, or has, sorry, I'm speaking ahead. Our opponent casts a Void Shatter targeting that, at which point we consider whether we should be boarding in Ceremonious Rejection to counter that. That is one draw to scatter the winds, that you don't need to worry about that. Though, at the same time, against like these Grixis zombie decks, you do really kind of need the Void Shatters to exile their spells. So, I don't really have an answer. I'm not a control mage right now. But those are the things to consider. So you draw a Spell Queller, get our beats on. Our opponent casts literally anything, so we Spell Queller it in the hopes of stunning their growth. Our Spell Queller's not long for this world, honestly. It's just how this matchup works. So I bring the beat down. And at this point, now that I have the land, this is where I'm going to try to stick the tracker. I'll get my free card off it, and it will immediately die. Galv Bombardment. Worth noting that does make another Galv Bombardment a little better. Also worth noting, one of the things I kind of was super relieved on early in this game was that when that there was no like tempo play to kill my Servant of the Conduit like off a Galv Bombardment. Also the fact that it just sets up the 3 power bombardment later, or 3 damage. So here's a great spot to Tamio. I was very excited to think about this because you can Tamio and survive a hit from a Fumarole. Great job. And I want to kind of resolve the Tamio underneath a Gear Hulk so that I can like potentially make a play to force my opponent's action, then lock the Gear Hulk with Tamio or something like that. And I'm playing Tamio pre-land so that I can potentially draw a land. One thing worth noting is I'm kind of sad that my fast land slowed down my Tamio by a turn, but that just might be a sequencing hazard to the deck. There's also a consideration, by the way, with this Spell Queller, if I had more threats that I would hold it to try and hit a Glimmer. But in this spot, I just need to advance the board. Just kind of talking through some stuff that I missed a little bit earlier. So Tamio is sadly gone. But we get to do some chip shotting. Opponent fires off to look at some cards. They're a little light on action, but that's okay for now. And I think at this point so I did misclick through my land there, and I should have been able to last turn I should have been able to clue here. I think I'm just supposed to attack, try and bait a Gear Hulk if my opponent has it. They don't. And then I just kind of have to slam the Wanderer and hope they don't have it, because I'm not beating Gear Hulk anyways. And newsflash, they have a Gear Hulk, and I don't beat it. So that happens. If I had been able to crack the clue and I had a worse threat, I would have extended that instead, by the way. But sadly, that is not what happened. Instead, I'm stalemated. I draw a brick. I play all my cards. My opponent draw some cards. This is very bad for us. This is probably the point where you assume that you're just dead, especially because my opponent put one of the cards on top of their library. Scry to top's always the indicator that you are completely and utterly out of the game. And this is the other indicator. This is about the point where I determine it is completely and utterly over. And then this is the point where it is literally completely and utterly over. Because I draw a brick after losing my creatures to cause Lex return. Which I did not read into enough. The Desperation Tamio does not resolve. My opponent confirms my suspicions that I am dead. I should have read more into this cause Lex return, but we'll get to that. Let's fire up our game 2 replay. Um, this game is interesting. So our opponent mulligans, great for us. And we're going to attune for an island because all of our sideboarder cards are blue. Just to go over sideboarding real fast, I brought in the extra tireless trackers. Let me just bring up the deck list so this is a little bit easier for everyone. So I brought in 2 Jace, 3 Negate, and 2 tireless trackers, and an Evolving Wilds. I sideboarded out 2 Harness Lightning, 2 Reflector Mages, no creatures to really interact with. A bunch of Spell Quellers because they're just going to die. They're not actually getting me anywhere. And my opponent's better at playing the Flash game than I am, so it's not a profitable card to have in this matchup. It's kind of just like a 2-3 flyer. Whirl of Virtuoso makes multiple things. The rest of your creatures are cheaper dorks or just bigger. Yeah, just off the team. And Servant kind of makes your mana work. And then for the Wilds, I kind of made a little land swap in order to actually board it out. It was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I boarded out 1 to Mio, just because the Frost Breath is a little worse, and so like it's not the most consistent. It's not like an actual threat. It's like a card that's only good once I have threats on the battlefield. So I'd rather just kind of get to the point where I have threats first. And then the swap for the land was I boarded out 1 Inspiring Vantage because I'm boarding out 3 white spells, and I boarded it, or sorry, 5 white spells, and I boarded in the Evolving Wilds. So I need less untapped white mana early, is the gist. I'd rather have the Evolving Wilds to trigger Tracker twice. Anyways, back to this second game here. So we have a Tune. We jam a Long Tusk Cub. And not going to activate. My goal is to just avoid the removal as much as possible, though. It should be obvious my opponent doesn't have a Harness Lightning because it would have just died on the spot if they did. Get my bonus energy, get my attack in. And I determined I'd rather start a sizing fight on my opponent's end step, I think. Which, in retrospect, I think that just pushing it to a 4 toughness creature was probably better here. Because, again, it's clear my opponent doesn't have a Harness Lightning. But I don't get punished. I get pretty lucky. I guess I don't really know what I get punished by off the top. Harness Lightning and also like I don't know. I could have had to trade my negate for something silly, but we're just at a point where I just don't want my cub to die. I don't really have anything to do with, you know, I just want to hit my opponent with cub and kill them with it because they're not doing anything. I'm not doing anything. They're taking damage every turn. And my creature is getting harder to kill for them because they're all damage-based removal. So, there's no need for me to activate. I can save the activation for some convenient time where my opponent doesn't have mana up and can't like respond with multiple kill spells potentially. I don't know. And also worth noting that didn't take a turn off the clock because it's 4 plus 5 plus 5 is lethal. Whatever. The damage is not costing me anything. My opponent fires a Glimmer on end step here, and I opt to just save the negate for something that actually costs mana that interacts with Cub. They put cards on, I didn't actually check this in game, bottom, which means they're digging for answers. They're going to try to upkeep Also, I added the counters in response to the Glimmer, by the way, just so I can get the counters on there so it's harder for my opponent to kill in response to activations with removal. They're going to have a weird card on upkeep, which is Brutal Expulsion. Um, this is another card that flags me for sideboarding in Ceremonious Rejection. Just enough devoid cards. I negate that and continue with my life as though nothing happened, aka beat the crap out of my opponent with Long Tusk Cub. And sadly, all good things must come to an end. So I respond with the activation. My opponent has the extra removal spell to pump it over. And they'll use 2 removal spells on my creature. So I play a Tireless Tracker, get my Evolving Wilds Kraken. Um, this, I should have waited in reality, to play around a removal spell or whatever, just upkeeped it. But my opponent had the F6 read, aka they responded too fast to what I was doing, so I just got my free roll clue in. Also, it's possible my opponent used all their kill spells. But my opponent fires this Glimmer, which is just like this huge sign of weakness. They're digging for an answer to Tracker when they're dead on board. So, even though Gal Bombardment is the 3 damage that would kill it, I just fire up my clue and my opponent concedes the game. Long Tusk Cub, good for 16 damage. That card felt really, really impressive. Um, we got a little lucky. There was a turn where we could have gotten just like Gear Hulked on the Brutal Expulsion, but we just didn't. Um, yeah, my cards are starting to line up a little better here. Going to sideboard again, I looked at this rejection and opted not to. Um, I really should have in the face of Kozilek's Return too, which I didn't account for, because that signals a lot of things. You're not just like playing Kozilek's Return to deal 2 damage to each creature in this metagame, it feels like. So I think I should have had 2-ish ceremonial rejections in the face of that. But my logic was I didn't know if my opponent had actually left in Void Shatter or not. If you just look at their graveyard, who knows? So now game 3, bit more of a slog here. So game 3 hand looking pretty nice. We got threat, and card that benefits off of us having threats. Great. Opponent has a tap land. We follow with a land. Opponent has a tap land. I have a cub. I have a huge sigh of relief because no EOT Gal Bombardment. That was a really huge sigh of relief, actually, because if I got Gal Bombardment, that game could have been just basically lights out there. Just come behind on curve. Our opponent instead has to Kozilek's Return. Makes me realize how important Attune is. Attune is just the best energy card. Again, we're going to do the same thing as game 1, where we follow up on another non-tracker creature to make sure we get the tracker value. I played this so I have the spread of mana, leave up the blue to represent rejection or dispel. Brutal Expulsion with 1 mode looks really stupid. I will note that. That card is not seen play for good reason. So we get the tracker and tap land and get all of our value. Great. So we get our tracker value. We get our attack in, maybe force an action from our opponent or something. I don't know. And then just slam Jace on curve. I'd rather just use my mana efficiently in this spot. Also, if it resolves, getting the most scries out of it. So we scry to bottom. Our opponent digs for something. Digs a lot for something. We scry again to bottom. And crack a clue to see what we get. And it's basically the best possible. Making sure I tap right for everything. There we go, so negate. So this turn's pretty scripted. We just make another clue. We play our Voltaic Brawler, and we bash for 4. And so I'm going to crack a clue on end step here. The logic behind that is that I want to get this tracker up to a big enough to kill Hulk 6-7? Or sorry, 7-6. And it's going to die basically regardless to harness because my opponent has so much energy. Um, I'd rather just use my mana efficiently and have the mana up to fight Hulk. My opponent has a nice little interaction here, which is kill all my stuff, but still got a Jace for that. So I'm going to be very stupid and misclick through making my converge thing for no reason. Scry to bottom again. And this is where I make a little bit of a decision, which is um, I don't want to use Wilds or Attune with 3 Scries to the bottom. I'm not actually filtering anything out of my deck. So I'm going to immediately Ultimate Jace as soon as I can, because it seemed like with so few cards in my opponent's hand, it was going to be very hard for them to fight out of that. They respond with a Glimmer, which means that they've already cast a spell. Jace won't counter their first spell this turn, so they need to get under it. I tap for Tamio, plus on the Woodland. It dies to a Harness Lightning, so my opponent gets to free roll on energy off my mistake. And we still continue with this line of don't use Evo Wilds or anything. We stick this Wanderer, that's a 6/6, great. Draw another card with a clue, pump on this, get our card out of that, and get the attack in. That sequence of turns is pretty straightforward. We even get to attack into a Gear Hulk, which is nice. We just kind of pass defensively. Drawing Spell Queller, good choice, great spell to draw. And here's where things get a little tricky. So our opponent runs a spell into our emblem. Okay, so they're going to play Elder Deep Fiend. Not what I was expecting. Very bad for us. And this is another thing. This is what I was trying to say. I should have figured out with the Causal X returns. So double K return takes out that. I make sure I stick a creature here. My opponent shoves 2 things at Tamio, which I don't know if they should have shoved in my life total or Tamio or not, but I just let it die. I could have traded Spell Queller here, but I just don't have threats, so just having a Tamio on 1 counter doesn't help me. Okay, that's a pretty good draw. It means that I get to attack my opponent to 5. They can attack back for 13 potentially. But if they miss their land drop, I can draw a creature to, if they hit the land drop the turn after to chump block and win the race. So I attack them. I'm not just blocking a Fumarole or whatever. And still not going to shuffle my library. So I take that for 5. My opponent clearly trying to do something with their mana, which ends up being double Filigree Familiar just to gain the life back that I dealt. So now I am basically just forced to be on the defensive. My opponent fires up double Fumarole, rumbles in. I use Blossoming Defenses to trade for one of the bigger creatures and soak up more damage. We're at 4 life. Pretty desperate times. Tireless Tracker is a good start. I need to get both cards here, so I'm forced to shuffle. 2 physical cards is what I need this turn. We draw, again, best possible. So we have to make a 6/6 with a negate up and attack in because I have negate protection for basically anything my opponent can do except for Deep Fiend, which I'm dead to regardless of what I do. Opponent passes back. I don't EOT because, again, at this point my opponent's low on resources. I just want to negate. I can draw the card later. I have so much mana. So I don't know if this was technically a mistake or not, letting my opponent... This is something I thought about on earlier turns where I just don't cast a spell. Because I don't want my opponent to be able to play something relevant. I want them to have to, not use a counterspell as their first spell of the turn into the emblem. I want to be able to counter their actual interactive spell. But I felt like I was going to have to cast a spell anyways this turn, so I get my land, clue up, cycle through, find a Gear Hulk, And at this point, with a one card in my opponent's hand, I'm just going to go for lethal. Again, I'm dead to Deep Fiend regardless of what I do. And fortunately, their card is just a Glimpse, and they die. Or Glimmer, sorry. Glimpse is a different card. Um, so that game, we got a little lucky at the end there, but our cards are individually pretty good. The Deep Fiend K return and the Control Shell was very interesting, and I'd be interested in exploring that a little more.